Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Wendigo horror stories. First story, possible Dogman encounter. So, I live in central KS, not too far off a reservation on a farm that was established roughly around 1858 or so. I just moved out here about 2 weeks ago, and there has been something stalking the farm. At first, I thought it was coyotes or even feral dogs and took appropriate measures. Yes, we have livestock guardian dogs, and they do their job. But tonight, both my BF and I saw something that really doesn't fit any local wildlife. The first time I saw it was around 9 p.m., and it was about 25 to 40 foot away with grayish fur, but it covered somewhere around half an acre to an acre in a matter of moments, like bring a BB gun up to bear. Mind you, I thought it was a coyote and just wanted to scare it off from my chickens, not trying to injure it. And it was big, very, very big. By the time it got to the tree line and looked back at me, forward-facing eyes, it was every bit of 7 to 10 feet tall. About an hour and a half later, my BF and I were back outside, and we both saw it at that point much, much, much closer, just across the road, maybe 75 feet away. And it was every bit of the same 7 to 10 feet tall, with a bipedal gait snapping full-size tree branches. If you've ever heard a tree branch break, you know what I'm talking about. It went from being dog level to the ground to being taller than us from that far away while standing in a creek bed. Also, potentially unrelated, we have heard voices outside that were most definitely not human and not a cat or animal vocalizing. So there's that too. Yes, I'm a pagan. Yes, I am a witch. No, I don't have my usual wards and such up because I frankly haven't had time, and there are leftover protections from one of the previous owners, my BF's now deceased GMA, such as an intense amount of wind chimes, dream catchers, and similar talismans. Any ideas or suggestions? Stories are welcome too. Just trying to get a handle on what the next steps might be for us at this point. Second story, huge dog-like creature protecting me from something worse. When I was in residency, I lived near the hospital, so I walked back and forth for my shifts. One night, I got out very late, around 2 a.m., and was walking home the way I usually did. This was in the middle of a big-ish city/urban area, although pretty deserted for being so late on a weeknight in winter, so no people or cars were around. That in itself was a bit unusual, as usually there was some traffic even that time of night. The air felt too still. I looked up, and blocking my path, some ways ahead, was a giant dark dog. Giant like Great Dane sized or bigger, but a different shape unlike a dog I've seen before. It peered at me, and as I started to walk toward it, it snarled. I stopped and slowly backed up, and it stopped and just stood there. I started to walk around it with a much wider berth, and it snarled again. It wouldn't let me proceed in that direction at all. Very creeped out, I started to walk back to the hospital and turn around to find the dog gone. There wasn't anywhere it could have quickly hidden. Shaken, I returned to the hospital and explained the situation to the police officer there, who drove me home. The dog was gone, and I never saw anything like it again. As scared of the dog as I was, I had an uncanny and very clear feeling that it was protecting me from something horrific by not letting me go that direction, alone, and very late at night. I've never written this story down before, but I can't stop thinking of it, despite it being about 5 years ago. Anyone ever heard of anything like this? Third story, the big black dog. This happened when I was around 10 years old, and I still can't explain it. As background, the upstairs level of our house had a small landing with 4 rooms in close proximity to the stairs. My parents' room on the right, a bathroom straight ahead, and me and my sister's rooms on the left. One day, I was standing in the bathroom getting ready when, from the corner of my eye, I noticed what appeared to be a large black creature on the stairs. I turned to look directly at it and saw a huge, fluffy black dog bounding up the stairs. We didn't have a dog at the time, but our neighbors had a big black Newfoundland named Schooner. Anyway, I watched the dog run upstairs and turn right into my parents' room. I assumed Schooner had somehow gotten into our house, and I was worried about our cats. So I ran out of the bathroom and slammed my parents' door, trapping the dog in the room. Then I stood on the landing and called for my mom, yelling, "Mom, help!" I just trapped a huge dog in your room. I think it might be Schooner." Seconds later, she came upstairs. We stood on the landing next to the closed door while I explained what happened. She told me to stay there. Then she opened the door, walked in, and closed it behind her. About a minute later, she walked out with a cynical look on her face and said, "Very funny." I looked at her confused and said, "What do you mean?" She replied, "There's no dog in there." I couldn't believe it. I told her that was impossible. Then I ran into the room and searched everywhere. My mom was right. There was no dog in that room. We were on the second floor, and the windows were screened and closed. From the moment I slammed the door until I searched the room, I was standing beside the only exit. There's no way the dog could have escaped without me seeing it. My mom shrugged it off, still suspicious that I was playing a trick on her. She eventually blamed it on my active imagination. But that's the only time in my life that I've physically seen something that wasn't there. I know I didn't imagine it. To this day, I have no clue what happened. Was it a one-time hallucination for no apparent reason? Was it a ghost? A glitch in the Matrix? Did I cross from one plane of existence into another? I'm a rational person who always looks for rational, evidence-based explanations. And I can almost always find one. But I cannot find any rational explanation for that experience. Fourth story. Weird creature spotted in Minnesota. Hello, everyone. I'm reaching out because of an event that happened last night. I need help figuring out what my mother and I saw. I moved to Minnesota about 6 months ago. It's a pretty cold state. More or less, I love it here. It's very peaceful, and when it snows, it's really beautiful. However, my image of Minnesota was changed last night. Me, my mom, and my stepfather were all sitting down watching a movie in the living room. As the movie was about to end, we paused it because my mom wanted to go smoke and I had to use the restroom. Once I'm back from using the restroom, I go and sit down with my stepdad. A few seconds later, my mom opens the patio door and yells for us to get out there. We rush outside, and she tells us that she started hearing the noise of something big walking in the snow. When she started to look around for where the noise was coming from, about 40 feet away was a white trailer. She said that when she looked over there, she saw something with red eyes staring at her. She said that it looked like a really big dog. At first, my stepdad said that it was probably a coyote. Then I started to think on how my mom heard a coyote walking in the snow 40 or 50 feet away. I realized that it had to have been something very big. I've always been one to believe in paranormal things. My mother, not so much. We look around for a bit longer, then we go back inside. A few hours later, I leave my room to go grab a soda so I can continue playing Halo. After the whole event, I've had this unshakable feeling. So I decided to just look outside to reassure myself that she was seeing things. As my eyes scan the edge of the woods, I don't really see anything. I take a deep breath and I grab the soda and close the fridge. As I close the door, I glimpse out the window and freeze. Sure enough, I see a pair of red eyes peering at me through the trees. I couldn't see much because of how dark it was. It was around 3 a.m. But know what I saw? I saw something that I've never seen before. Those red eyes went right through me. Then as quick as I had seen them, they disappear. What did I see? Fifth story. My father has the curse of the Dogman. There was a running joke in my family for many years. It was always the ladies who said it, never the men, as if the guys were in on some secret the women didn't know about. There goes the werewolf, my mother and aunts would say as Grandpa was going out the door, hat in hand. He always disappears on full moons and never comes back until the morning. As children, we would laugh along with them, not understanding the true reasons for his leaving. The years went on, and my grandfather, who I call my Opa, kept disappearing on full moons until he was no longer able to walk. Soon after that, he was admitted to the hospital and came down with a bad infection, passing away a short while later from a myriad of complications. Strangely, after his death, my dad took up the tradition of disappearing during full moons. He never did it before Opa passed away, but suddenly he started exhibiting the exact same behavior. "I'm heading out," he would say to my mother, putting on his coat and leaving the house right before sunset. "I'll see you in the morning." Again? You really are turning into your father. My mom would call after him as he hurried down the porch steps, sometimes jogging or running, as if late for an appointment. She didn't realize how right she was. Asterisk. Eventually, I moved away and went to college, found a girlfriend, and got engaged, married, and bought a house. If you want to sum up my entire life in one sentence, I guess that about does it. Except something happened recently, derailing that one-sentence description of my existence and turning it into a rambling run-on with no end in sight. My father called and told me he needed to talk to me about something. He said it was important and couldn't wait. I needed to come over right away. What is it? I asked once we were finally alone in his basement man cave. He poured 2 glasses of scotch halfway to brim, then added a bit more for good measure. He handed me one of the glasses and I took it, eyeing him suspiciously. I don't drink, I reminded him. Trust me, you'll want that. He sat down on a leather chair across from me, the fire roaring beside him. I took a tentative sip and winced at the burn, smacking my lips to try and appreciate the taste, then set the glass down on the table beside me. I've been trying to keep this from you for as long as possible. I have to tell you something important about your Opa. Opa's been dead for years. I smiled nervously. You're not losing your memory, are you, Dad? My memory is fine. Just listen, okay? Your Opa had a secret, and now it's my secret, and I have to pass it on to you. It's important, okay? Just trust me. All right, I said nervously, and took another sip of the drink. The burn wasn't as bad this time, and was more like a warmth that coated my throat and sizzled in my stomach. You remember how Opa always disappeared on full moons? Did you ever wonder why he did it? And why I started doing it right after he died? It had been a while since I'd thought about this. I had just accepted it as part of life at a certain point, like a strange paternal family tradition. I had semi-forgotten my dad's odd habit of escaping the house on full moons. Looking back at his face, I was surprised by how many new wrinkles had formed around his eyes when I hadn't been paying attention. It occurred to me how often I looked at him without really looking at him. I always thought it was an excuse for you to get out with the guys, to go drinking or to the strip club or something. Some of my friends tried to convince me you were in a cult, but I told them that was ridiculous. I thought about whether or not I should say my last thought, and it slipped out anyways. A guy at college said you were probably in the mafia. I looked at his somber face and felt my chest grow tighter. Then he burst out laughing, breaking the tension. I laughed along with him, still feeling that stone of dread in my belly. I'm not in a cult, or the mafia. Okay, well, what is it then? His face turned grave again. He took a sip of his drink. Then he took another and another. Finally, after several more long moments of silence, he stood up. Let's go for a walk, he said. You need to see it to believe it. I followed after him reluctantly. My father took me out to the woods behind his house, which led deep into a forested wilderness that stretched on for a long, long ways. There was no path, but he seemed to know exactly where he was going as he trudged through thick grass and brush, leading me deeper and deeper into the woods. What the hell are we doing out here? I asked him, slapping at a mosquito which landed on my neck, leaving a pool of blood on my palm. You'll see, was all he would say. We walked for a long time, mostly without conversation, through the dark forest, far from the path. Finally, we reached my father's intended destination, a little clearing with a few logs situated around a fire pit. It was evening and sunset was an hour or so away. A full moon was waiting bloated behind the horizon. I glanced over and was alarmed to see a few chains attached to a tree nearby. My eyes traced down the length of them to a set of steel manacles. Dad, what are those chains for? I asked, getting scared. He must have heard the fear in my voice and tried to reassure me. It's okay, son, he said, his eyes locked onto mine. You know I would never hurt you in a million years, right? I nodded. Good. Now I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Can you trust me? I nodded again, tears welling up in my eyes for reasons I didn't understand. Listen, we have a bit of time. There's no big rush. That's why I brought you out here early. There's a few things I need to tell you, and some are going to be easier to believe than others, but they're all true. And when I ask you to, when I ask you to do what I need you to do, I need you to not ask any questions. I need you to just do it and trust me, okay? I guess, as long as it's not too crazy. I said, trying to keep it together. Just tell me already. I'm dying of suspense over here. He motioned for me to sit on one of the logs next to the fire pit. I did so, and he began to build a fire. Despite his age, he could still do it quicker than anyone I'd ever met. I watched him set it alight, and it roared up in an instant inferno. He sat down on a log, and his eyes met mine again. My soul felt like it was leaving my body as he spoke his next words. I'm dying, son. It's the big C. I couldn't even respond. All I could do was sit there with my mouth hanging open, staring across the fire at him. The embers popped, and sparks flew into the air between us. It's in my colon, which means it's everywhere else too, according to the doctors. They did the tests, gave me a few options. Chemo and radiation will extend my life, probably, but no guarantees. And there will be side effects. I saw how that went with your grandmother, and I'm not going to go through that, which means I'm going to finish things au natural. I opened my mouth to speak, but he cut me off before I could say a word. It's my choice, so don't argue. They're giving me a few months at most, maybe less. I don't know how I'm going to look in a week or a month, and so I need to tell you all of this now while I still can. While my mind is still sharp, you understand? I was in shock, unsure of what to say. It wouldn't sink in for several more days, so at that moment I just stood up and gave him a big hug, squeezing him tight until he made a pained noise. For the first time, I noticed how thin he'd gotten lately. My arms used to have trouble making it all the way around his waist, but now I felt his ribs and the lack of a belly. Again, I've been looking at him, but not really seeing him for a while. What else do you need to tell me? I said, after saying all of the other things that you say when someone you love tells you they're dying. It sounded important, whatever it was. About Opa. He nodded, looking solemn. Yeah, unfortunately, that's even worse news. I really don't want to tell you about this. I have no choice, though. You have to understand that I tried, and there is no way out of it. Like the cancer, it's a part of me. It's a part of us. Just remember, no matter what, that I tried. You don't need to go through that, okay? This is a curse, an irreversible one, that has been passed down to my side of the family and my side alone. Only the men are afflicted with it, never the women. We try to keep it from them so they don't have to live with the guilt and the pain that we do. I prayed for your mother to have a girl. You have to believe me. I prayed you would not be born into this. What are you talking about, Dad? The cancer? Are you saying that's some sort of family curse? That's crazy. I mean, genetics play a part, I'm sure. But it's not Dash. No, he cut me off. We can die from diseases just like any mortal. The stories are all wrong about that. We are merely men with a terrible curse. I waited for him to explain in plain English and hoped that eventually he would get around to it. The sun was drawing closer and closer to the horizon, and that felt like an important detail for some reason, like an hourglass running out of sand. He stood up and pointed to his belt. It was old, and I realized it was the same one my grandfather had worn. There was a silver wolf head which comprised the buckle. This belt is special, son. It holds an ancient power. It was passed down me by my father, your Opa, and it was given to him by his father before him, going back for hundreds and hundreds of years. This belt is what gives us our power, but it also carries with it a great curse. I stared at him, wondering what the hell he could possibly be talking about. Just listen, he said, as if reading my mind. In about half an hour, you won't need to believe my words. You'll see it for yourself. It's a full moon tonight, Jason, and that means I'm going to turn into something else. A thing that's not quite a man and not quite a wolf. It's somewhere in between. What? I nearly screamed. That's insane. Dad, this is all nuts. I thought maybe the cancer was affecting his mind. What other reason could there be for such a bizarre lie? Instead of debating with me, he just continued as if I hadn't spoken. This belt is a symbol of our power, but it is more than that. It carries with it our strength and our curse. If you should ever lose it, it will haunt you. Every death you see on the news will be your burden to bear, for you have forsaken your sworn duty. The dead will come to you in your dreams, and you will never truly rest again. Hear my words, son, and remember them. I sat back down on the wooden log, landing hard on my ass and nearly toppling it over. Dad, come on. You're kidding me, right? Is this a joke? He shook his head. I wish it was, son, but it's very real, and I'm going to prove it to you. No, Dad, you don't have to do that. I yelled, but he ignored me. He stood up and walked over to the tree where chains and manacles were attached. I followed after him, running to catch up. Despite his age, he could still move quickly, and the fire he had started was still roaring behind us, and I had no concerns about tending it to keep it going. It was blazing high, and he had already stacked a pile of wood nearby to feed it, as if planning to stay here for a while. Or maybe, it occurred to me, he was thinking that I would want to stay for a while here with him. I can lock these ones, but I need you to do the last one, my father said, putting the handcuffs around his ankles and wrists. He snapped them shut and locked them with a key. I noticed they hung loosely around his wrists, and he could easily escape them. But maybe, just maybe, a voice in my mind said he would grow into them. Come on, we're running out of time, he said, and I noticed for the first time that the sun had set and it would be dark soon. It was twilight now, and there was very little light remaining. An orange full moon was cresting large on the horizon. Normally I would argue with him, but I could tell he was serious and would be very upset if I tried. Feeling numb, I went over to the steel bracelet on his left wrist and locked it with the key he handed me. Then I stood back, surveying the strange scene. Mosquitoes were buzzing and landing on my neck, and I slapped at them, wishing I brought bug spray. They were landing on my dad too, but he didn't seem to notice them. This is going to get ugly, he said. Whatever I do, don't try to help me. Don't try to assist me in any way. It's going to look like I'm in pain, and I'm going to be in some pain, but it will only last for a short while, and then I'll be myself again. I opened my mouth to say something and closed it again. What the hell could I say? Dad, you don't have to do this, I tried. Whatever is happening to you, I'm sure it's not Dash. A noise interrupted my speech, and I realized that it was the sound of clothing being torn. It was his shirt. The skin underneath was bulging and growing like a tumorous lump, but then it smoothed out and spread, turning into a growing ripple of muscle. It stretched down the length of his left arm, hairs bristling out from his skin along the way, following the path of its growth. His left arm now fit snugly in the handcuff which I had assumed was too large for him. He winced and bared his teeth from a sudden pain, letting out a low noise. I reached forward to put my hand on his shoulder. Get back, he roared, and his voice sounded different now, lower and thicker like the growl of a dog. I stumbled backwards, startled and terrified, and tripped over a branch, landing hard on my back. My head whipped into a rock and bounced up and down a couple times before settling in the dirt. Pain bloomed back there, and I saw stars explode throughout the darkness of my vision. It's possible I passed out momentarily, or for more than a few minutes. When I opened my eyes, all I could think about was the sharp ache in the back of my skull. I reached back to feel the warmth of blood on my hand and held it up to my face to see how bad it was, but it was too dark to tell. I looked down to see my head had collided with a rock which was embedded into the forest floor. The stars were out in the night sky above, but they were not as visible due to the brightness of the full moon and the canopy of swaying tree branches above. Struggling to rise to my feet, I looked to see a creature which appeared to be a werewolf chained to a tree nearby. It stood on its hind legs, flexing and straining against the chains which bound it to the tree. It snapped its teeth and fixed its eyes on me. The dirt at the base of the tree buckled and crunched as if it might lift the whole thing out from the dirt, but the roots held firm, and a second later the creature relaxed slightly, its snout sniffing at the air, smelling my blood on the wind. Dad, I whispered, moving closer to it. Is that really you? Are you still in there? The creature standing on two legs was covered in thick, wiry fur, gray streaked with white, just like my dad's beard. and when I looked into his eyes, I could see something familiar there, a glimmer in them. But then the beast was snapping its jaws and aggressively growling at me, pulling on its chains as it tried to break free once again. It was too much to look at, too much to bear after the news I had been given. All of this was too much. It was making me feel sick just thinking about how much my life had changed in a few short hours. I slowly backed away and went towards the fire, grateful when the sound of growling began to recede and eventually went away altogether, drowned out by the crackling of the flames and the wind in the trees. The bonfire was guttering, despite my dad's excellent construction of it. I got the feeling I'd been out for a while, judging by the moon and the stars in the sky above. At least it was still going enough that I could coax it back to life. I fed a few more logs onto it, and some smaller kindling beneath that, then began to blow on the embers until the dry wood caught alight. Within a few minutes it was roaring again, and I was holding my hands up to the blaze to warm them. They were still shaking, and my teeth were still chattering from fear and shock, but I was starting to settle down a little bit. My father was a werewolf. It didn't seem real, but there it was. There he was. All I needed to do was look over at him to confirm I wasn't dreaming. This was real. I decided to dig around in my dad's bag to see if he'd brought anything to drink. Sure enough, there were hot dogs and cold soda, just waiting for me to find them. Cracking one open, I glanced at my dad, the Dogman, out of the corner of my eye. He had settled back against the tree, as if resigned to his fate. But I thought I could sense an occasional movement, as if he were still testing the restraints. Something else caught my eye at the bottom of the bag, and I took it out to examine it in the light of the fire. Journal, the cover of the book read. A sticky note was attached to the front of it, which I pulled off to read in the light. Hope this helps. Dad. It was his journal, I realized, and he wanted me to read it. I opened it and began to read from the first page as my father struggled and growled in his chains a little ways away. Still trembling with terror, I held the pages close to the fire and began to read, hoping to learn the secrets of my family's curse. Instead, what I found was a record of my father's life, and a startling picture of what my own grim existence would soon look like. January 10th, 2001. It finally happened. For years he warned me, and yet still I was not prepared for this. How could anyone hope to be prepared for this? Those people. So many died by my own hands. The newspaper called it an animal attack, and that is not too far from the truth. When I am in that form, I am all instinct and anger, completely unable to form rational thoughts. That does not excuse my lack of preparation. My father told me to prepare, but I used my grief as an excuse to forget. I will go to hell for the things I have done. There is no doubt in my mind about that. Heaven has no place for a man who can tear apart a woman with his bare teeth. Next time I'll be more careful. For the next few weeks, I will need to devise a plan. I will need to speak to Uncle Horace. He promised to help me, but I do not know how he will manage to do so if he suffers from the same affliction. Still, at the very least, he may be able to give me some advice. Until next time, GH. I read a few more pages, then realized the fire needed to be fed, and stood up to grab more wood. As soon as I did, I heard a loud, growling noise from behind me, where my father was chained to the tree. He pulled against the restraints again, and I thought I saw something crack. A piece of the tree splintering and coming loose. But then he settled back again, and I realized it was nothing of consequence. Just a piece of bark that had come loose. Or so I thought. Asterisk. After stoking the fire and letting it burn for a while, warming my hands against the heat of the flames, I settled back into reading. February 9th, 2001. It worked. The chains held fast, and the manacles were large enough to keep my wrists secure without injuring myself. My arms are sore and my shoulders ache, but at least my conscience is clean, knowing I did everything in my power to prevent disaster. Damn this belt. I wish I could get rid of it. I wish I could just throw it in the ocean and let the tide take it away, but Uncle Horace warned me not to. If I do, then someone else will find it, and who knows what they might do with this power if left unchecked? The world would be safer without us in it. GH. It was sad to think that my father had help, but I would have none. If this condition was really passed on to me, I would be the last one in our family to be afflicted with it. I had no kids and wasn't planning on having any. And my great-uncle Horace and all of the other men in my family had passed away. I was the last man in the Hamburg line, and that meant the family secret would die with me, assuming I could keep it a secret. It also meant that once my father passed away, there would be no one around to help me with this curse. No one to guide me like Uncle Horace had guided him. The journal I was holding was all I had, aside from the advice of my father. And he didn't have much time left by the sounds of it. Something made a loud cracking sound in the forest behind me, and I stood up and turned around. I saw the vague outline of a person, just a smudge of shadow among the trees, and then heard the air whistling behind me as something large and heavy came swinging at my head. I don't remember it hitting me, only the pain I felt afterwards. The fire was in front of me when I blinked my eyes open, but the flames were blurry and ill-defined. My head was spinning and my ears were ringing as I tried to focus on the man in front of me who was speaking. He snapped his fingers once, twice, 3 times, as if trying to get me to pay attention. There we go. Wakey, wakey, he said, grinning. Nice job, fellow hunter. Sorry to blindside you like that, but we had to be sure. Rumor has it there's some sick freaks around here who are friendly with these creatures. I groaned, trying to form words. Who are you? I looked around to see more men nearby, all dressed in camouflage. Hunters, he said. Dogman hunters. Shit. I looked over to where my dad was chained up. There were 2 men taking pictures of him with their cell phones while he growled and snapped his teeth at them. Nowhere near as accomplished as you, though, the man's friend said. I've seen a few of them, but never caught one and chained it up. Damn, dude. How'd you manage that? I tried to think up a lie. My head was still spinning, though, and I was having trouble thinking straight. Hey, Dave, check this out, one of the guys near my father said, pointing at the belt around his waist. I stood up on shaky legs and wandered over to join the group of them. Yeah, it's weird he was wearing that belt when I found him. I muttered, trying to think of what words to say on the fly. How'd you manage to subdue this beast, brother? One of the men asked. He was tall, with a long black beard, wearing plaid and a black jacket. Almost looks like a prior arrangement to me. The group of them turned to look at me suspiciously. A prior arrangement? I asked. What's that even mean? This brought more murmurs from the group, and I heard a few unkind whispers about my true allegiance. Where's your gear? Your rifle and all your equipment? A louder grumbling began to rise up from the men, as a few of them began to move towards me. Is this your journal? A voice from behind me asked, reading through it aloud. All of my family secrets suddenly being spoken out into the world for this whole group of men to hear. He's one of them, someone said. We can't let him go. He's a leakin', a beast. From hell. 2 of them grabbed me from behind while the one holding the journal marched over, waving the book in his hand. Asked you a question, he said, smacking me on the forehead with the leather-bound book. Is this yours? I stared at him defiantly, the whole time watching my father out of the corner of my eye. He was still pulling on the restraints, testing them, straining against them with all of his might. The tree was bending against his efforts, the trunk splintering and cracking. My father's, I spat, looking behind him fully now, at the creature chained to the tree. It belongs to my father. There was grumbling amongst the group members, and then finally one of them spoke up loudly. We'll kill them both. Even if he's not one of them yet, he's got it in his blood. It's only a matter of time before he goes through the transformation. Grab him. Don't let him get away. I turned to run, but it was too late. They were already on me. One of the men tackled me, pinning me to the ground while another approached with a pistol. He cocked it, then aimed at my head. Silver bullets, mate. Made him myself. The cold steel of the barrel was pressed up against my forehead, digging into my skin. Any last words, Leakin? I tried to speak, but all that came out was a whimper. I wasn't ready to die. There was so much more I wanted to do in life. All of my dreams and plans for the future, all of my brightest memories and the faces of my loved ones flashed before my eyes. And I waited for the bullet that would end my life. Guess not. I felt the man tense up as he was about to pull the trigger. And then something broke. A loud crack erupted from nearby. Chains rattled and shook. Steel snapped, and then there was screaming from all around. I opened my eyes to look around and saw a bloodbath. The men who had been surrounding me were being slaughtered by a gray streak that moved faster than anything I'd seen before. It was a blur of movement, stopping for a second to disembowel a hunter, then swiftly moving on to the next. Blood erupted into the air to my left, and then my right, a fountain, a geyser, as men's throats were ripped out and their arms detached, and they tried to fight back ineffectually. It was like watching ants try to fight against a man. They stood no chance. The man who had been ready to shoot me was the last one alive. He held his gun with both hands, trying to keep it steady in his trembling hands. Each time the creature paused, he tensed up and got ready to fire. But an instant later, it was moving again, a blur streaking through the air, reappearing somewhere else before he could get shot off. I realized the creature was toying with him, as the beast grinned, showing its many long, sharp teeth. When he finally did manage to shoot at the beast, each bullet missed wild. He backed away, stumbling and falling over a tree trunk. The man crab-walked backwards, trying to find the gun he had dropped among the fallen leaves. The giant wolf creature came toward him, growling low and deep. "Stay back," the man shouted, finding his gun. "I'll shoot you. I'll... Get back. Get back." He pulled the trigger again. It fired once, then made several dry, clicking noises as he continued to squeeze the trigger, the revolver empty. The creature lunged at him. The man's screams were loud and awful, and I turned my head away so I wouldn't be forced to watch. Eventually he was quiet and could no longer make a noise. For a few minutes all I could hear was the wet sounds of blood being spilled and teeth working to chew through muscle and bone. When I opened my eyes and looked up, there was the face of a large wolf in front of me, staring right at me. I couldn't help but notice those teeth, long and white, coming to points that could crush a skull. For a moment I thought I would die, that this form of my father would not recognize me. Its giant, bloody maw came down towards me, and I cringed backwards, the smell of coppery entrails wafting out from its gullet. But instead of teeth snapping shut on my face, a soft, oversized tongue licked my cheek. And then the warmth of an enormous dog settled down on the forest floor beside me. His breathing was too fast and too heavy, I realized as I felt the warmth of blood soaking through my shirt. The hunter's last bullet had gotten him. I saw the wound as I sat up to look at him beside me. His eyes were wide and locked with mine, his mouth open and panting. "Dad, no." I stroked the soft fur of his cheeks and pressed my face against his. I kissed his forehead and watched as he closed his eyes and his breathing slowed, then stopped. After a long while, I stood up to find a bloodbath all around me. Dead hunters whose families and friends would soon be looking for them. I threw their phones into the blazing fire, hoping the pictures they had taken of my father had not been uploaded to the cloud. I looked down to see the journal had been burnt to embers in the fire. The hunter had dropped it into the blaze before he was torn to shreds. One last insult. One last attack. I had nothing left to show me the way now. I went back home to get a shovel and began to dig. It took a long, long time to make a pit big enough to bury all those bodies. When I was done, I felt exhausted, but I knew there was still more to do. I took my dad's belt and fixed it around my waist, sending it through the loops of my pants, and then looking down at the silver wolf head on the buckle. As I reached down to pick up my father's lifeless corpse, now human again, I found I had more strength than ever before. His body weighed almost nothing. I knew how to get home, and I carried my father back to see the crying eyes of my mother waiting at the door, as if she had known all along. It's been almost a month since all this happened. My dad's funeral was a couple weeks back, and it surprised me again how little of my family is left still alive. No men were there to see him off. Only the women of the family remained. They complimented me on how well I was handling everything, how mature I'd become, and they said how good I look wearing my father's old belt. That ancient family heirloom, which nobody wants. As if it's cursed. I have no one to help me now, no one to guide me. But I've been preparing for the next full moon. I found a sturdy tree, bigger than the last, deeper in the wilderness of the forest, and I've fixed it with manacles and thick steel chains. I'm watching the calendar, ready for the next full moon. I'm terrified of what will come next, but after reading my father's journal, I refuse to make the same mistake he did. I may be a monster now, but I will not allow myself to turn into a cold-blooded killer, unless I chance upon another Dogman hunter, wandering alone in the forest. Sixth story. When I was a child, I experienced something I can't explain, and no one believed me. Would love some insight. Hi. I have never shared this memory with anyone except the people who were there at the time. I fully understand that there may be a very simple explanation to explain what happened, and that would honestly be great. I was around 7 years old. My mom had driven us an hour away from home to visit our aunt and uncle who live in a town called Sandbach in England. Personally, Sandbach has a weird feeling for me, a very pristine, fake-looking town, but this may be due to my experience there. It was me and my sister who was 9, and my mom, me and my sister adopted, but I guess it's not really relevant. I vividly remember this day because my dad had died a few months back, and it was the first proper trip out of the house since his death. Anyway, we get to the house, and our aunt is fussing about because she never had kids of her own and wasn't overly fond of kids, but my uncle at the time, John, was kind of fun. Or so, I thought anyway. He was a strange man who suffered very badly from OCD. His disorder would eventually be what caused my aunt to divorce him. John took me and my sister Laura out to the garden to play. Looking back, I think this was to prevent us from making mess inside the house. He started a game with us. He said it was called Mr. Wolf, and the game went like this. You had to creep to the end of the garden and peek behind the shed where you would find Mr. Wolf. I remember him smiling, and it seemed like a really fun idea. I remember being excited, and their garden was really nice and perfect looking. I remember creeping up the garden, giggling, and peeking around the shed, and this is burned into my brain like a hot iron brand. Behind the shed there stood an absolutely massive wolf. But it wasn't a wolf really, it was really tall, like a huge adult man, covered in browny gray fur. It had a creepy long snout and horrible yellow eyes, and it was staring straight down at me. It even had a horrible matted tail. I remember being completely frozen with fear. I just stood staring at it. It had its back pressed up against the back of the shed. I have no idea where my sister was, but I'm sure she was in the garden too. We had to take in turns to peek at Mr. Wolf, I think. I remember as I stood staring at it. It raised its hand and put a finger to its snout and shushed me. I distinctly remember it had fingers not paws, but covered in fur. I remember its fur looked matted, and when I stood looking at it, it started to smile, and it had horrible long teeth. I remember running as fast as I could back up the garden, but my uncle wasn't in the garden anymore. I went into the house and told my mom about the wolf. I was really upset and begged her to come and see it. She went and looked, but there was nothing there. My uncle was in the garden and told me it was only a game and that there wasn't really a wolf. He then changed his story and said Mr. Wolf must have gone back to the forest. I know children have wild imaginations, but I know what I saw that day because it utterly froze me in terror. I was rooted to the spot. I asked my sister if she had seen the wolf when she went behind the shed, and she said she did. She said it was terrifying and that she never wanted to come back here again. This is a memory that has always really bothered me because that day is so vivid in my mind. I remember after the wolf, Laura, and I went to a local park to play across the road because we didn't want to be near the house. A less clear memory from a few months later is of a rare visit from my aunt and uncle. I remember he made up a game where me and Laura had to see who could tidy our room the cleanest. Looking back, maybe that was part of his OCD, but I remember being very conflicted when he visited. He was always kind of jolly and happy to play with us kids, where our aunt wasn't. But at the same time, I remember him asking if I wanted to search for Mr. Wolf in my garden. I have absolutely no memory of whether I looked in my garden for Mr. Wolf. The day is blank after that, possibly due to how much time has passed. One small inane detail I remember is him telling me I had to go back to my bedroom because I hadn't picked up one of my toys. That toy was a tiny plastic Dalmatian that was kind of like a Polly Pocket-sized toy. I don't know what happened that day, but my mom has always said it was my imagination, but my sister remembers it too. My aunt barely acknowledged the whole thing as she does. But to this day, I get this sick, unsettling feeling whenever I recall the memory. The wolf's face and form are still crystal clear in my head. Any theories besides imagination? Edit. So for some reason at 2:30 a.m., I decided to Google humanoid wolf monster, and now I won't be sleeping. In the results, there is something extremely similar to what I saw that day. In the results, I think it called a dog soldier. It's probably some fantasy thing, but that is extremely accurate to what I saw right down to the terrifying hands. Seventh story. My dog spoke to me a little while ago. 2 months ago, my dog spoke to me. Or just spoke, I guess, probably not to me. So yes, I know it's crazy, but hear me out. He said what sounded like, right? Like the way you would say it to someone you don't really believe. Although in retrospect, I don't think that's what he said. Doesn't matter. The dog is a pretty old, probably 12, slightly fat, heavily matted golden retriever. He was a family dog, but when I moved out, I brought him with me because we were always closest and my parents didn't really care for him. I'm 22, but when I was younger and we were alone, I used to talk to him like kids tend to do. I remember whispering things in his ear like, "You can talk to me, I won't tell anyone," or "I know you'll probably live by some sort of dog code that says you can't answer, but I wouldn't say anything." Of course, I never actually expected him to, and of course, he never actually did. Well, 2 months ago, on an unusually warm October morning, I was eating cold buttermilk pancakes at my little round table. I was on my phone, but I could see the dog in my peripherals. He was sitting, half leaning against the kitchen wall. "Right," he said. The dog said. I gotta say, it was not like anything that ever happened to me before. There's a strange feeling you get when something seemingly impossible happens. It's not fear, but it's just as uncomfortable as fear. Kind of feels like your brain is unable to process something so impossibly strange. My instinct was to try and shrug it off, but I knew it happened. Let me explain something very important here. It wasn't cool. It wasn't what you imagine when you imagine being able to talk to a pet. It was horrible. It wasn't like the movies where the dog says something and you look quickly over at him and he's just sitting there like a normal dog. When I looked over, he was looking at me, like really looking at me in the eyes. He was smiling, not smiling in any way I can adequately articulate. It was like a goofy, disgusting grin, like the grin of a brain-damaged rapist in a courtroom, childishly proud of what he's done. I hated it. He just sat there, and I hated it. I read some horror, not a lot because it kind of does scare me, but I read some. Usually in this part of the story, I kind of forget about what happened for a couple weeks. Well, let me just say, things didn't play out like a horror story. I never recovered from that moment in the kitchen. I was on edge at all times, and I hated the dog. He had taken to sitting against the wall most of the time now, leaning and looking at me like a pervert in the park. Maybe he was always like this, and I just never saw him in that light until now. Maybe this is why my parents never seemed to like him. Either way, I hated the dog, but I couldn't exactly get rid of it. I guess that would mean admitting to myself that what happened actually happened. I didn't know. Anyway, about a month after the incident in the kitchen, he spoke to me again. This time definitely to me. He said, "Oh no, okay." Like he wasn't saying anything coherent, just kind of what seemed like imitation, but not quite. It was more like talking to someone with a very low IQ, like he knows the language and has legitimate thoughts and ideas, but isn't really advanced enough to communicate properly. By the way, the dog giggled or chuckled or something after saying it. Like a sticky, guttural When a person's house is burglarized or a close family member dies, returning to your own home can be terrifying. But at least it is easy to explain, easy for others to understand. When a person's geriatric retriever starts talking to them every once in a while, it is not something you can go around telling people. At least, I assume that's the case. I never tried. I started avoiding my house at any cost, picking up extra shifts at work, sleeping at friends' houses, but I had to go back eventually. Ironically, the main reason was I had to feed the dog. Believe me, I thought about leaving him to starve. I would love nothing more than to come home to find him dead on the kitchen floor, slumped against the wall. But there was always a part of me that thought this whole thing was a big misunderstanding, like I just have hearing problems or hallucinations. Either way, I wasn't about to add dog killer to my already messed up resume of insane life experiences. I had been toying with the idea of taking him to a vet to see if they noticed anything, or on the off chance that he was terminally ill and I would have an excuse to put him down. The thing that has been stopping me all this time was the thought of trying to get him in my car. But by now, I had reached the end of what I could reasonably bear. I left work an hour and a half before his appointment today to leave enough time to drive home and get him into the car. I walked into the mudroom and didn't see him in his usual slumping spot in the kitchen, so I went to check the only other place he ever went, the basement. It's not like a spooky, damp basement or anything. It's mostly finished and half above grade, so pretty bright. Anyway, he wasn't there. He wasn't anywhere. I checked everywhere. Now at this point you may be thinking, well, there you go. Problem solved. Well, let me tell you, there's no way I would ever sleep again if I knew that hairy lumpsack was somewhere, waiting around the corner for me, with that sickly stare and sweaty, deviant aura about him. I went to the backyard and was hit with what felt like a ton of bricks. There was nothing to see, nothing to smell, nothing to hear, and yet I knew that he was in the shed. I knew it deep inside me, and it hit me like a cold, sloshing splash of water throughout my whole body. I stumbled back inside the house, and I've been sitting here slumped against the wall in the kitchen with a knife for 3 hours. Should I go look in the shed? It'll be dark soon. Well, thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.